How's it going, Ken?
Hey, Clint.
It's been a
It's going
while. It's been a
pretty
minute,
well,
as they
pretty
say.
well.
It's been a minute. Um, yeah, so it's a nice day here again. Fridays seem to be the day to do things outside in Western New York. Routinely is nice. How is the weather where you are?
Well, you can probably
Nice and
guess the natural light is the best part of it. I'm currently hiding behind a thin shell that's preventing me from becoming a an
a pile of
overdone
a
crispy
pile of
critter.
puddle.
Yes,
Well, that's good.
sweltering out
That's
there.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually mercifully cool today compared, but we've got uh, we've got the feels like 112 Fahrenheit index going on a
that's
regular
legit.
basis here. Yeah.
That is legit. We have a nice day too. I actually have my window open. You can see the little thing right here. It's open. So it's a nice day. Yeah, so what do we got going on today, Ken?
Well, we've got everybody's favorite format, the user spotlight, because that's where it gets real. That's where the rubber meets the road. People actually using what we've been working on. So I'm definitely excited to hear about what's working and what was confusing, what was easy, what can we make better, and
Yeah.
also just looking towards like what are people building.
Yeah, it's always nice to talk to people who are using OpenZiti. So Analytics HQ is, using OpenZiti. We found them, I think, last year at All Things Open, if I recall.
That's right. Yeah,
Yep.
a
And
serendipitous encounter.
yeah, very nice. So why don't we bring on the gang? We got a few people. So let's start with Chad and Kevin and Andrew. Hello, fellas.
Good morning.
Howdy, howdy.
All
Howdy.
right. How are things today? I don't know where everybody is. I think we're all East Coasters, though, right? Yeah. Is
Things are
it
going
warm
well.
where everybody is?
Yeah, normal summer day. I
Normal
love
summer
July.
day.
This is my favorite time of year. So I love it hot and humid.
Oh wow, wow, good for you. You must be liking it then. That's cool. So Chad, can you introduce the rest of your team here? I know we got Kevin and Andrew, but I think if you take it away, that'd be probably useful.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Chad Cravens with Analytics HQ. I've got Kevin Madison and Andrew Zaw. So we've been working on this product now for several years, and we're really excited because here in the next few months we're going to be kind of doing our public debut. Our mission, what we want to do, is we want to help people essentially, be able to tap into the modern analytics ecosystems at scale, securely and efficiently, right? So we know that data, there's just a lot of it. Now, what do we do with it, right? Developing data ecosystems is a very heavy and expensive task, and essentially we've automated that. And using ZD as a core component of how we do that in a secure and scalable manner. So really excited to talk about that.
That's neat. And what's your role in the project?
So I'm the founder and essentially lead developer of it. Excuse me. I've been I think I started about 5 years ago. It started as a essentially, looking at a file format called HDF5, and there was some kind of a request for a proposal on how do you work with this data format for big data, and I started looking into Hadoop versus HDF5, and uh, and I said, okay, well, first thing is if I have like a 10 gig or 100 gig file, how do I actually migrate that file into the cloud? And what you'll notice is that, moving large files is usually limited because the way that files transfer is like kind of in memory, right? So you have to kind of set your server to, but what if I have like a terabyte of data? So I implemented like a file transfer system where I would chunk the data and then
Hmm.
in parallel, transmit it and then create an algorithm that would automatically reassemble and then check that data.
Yeah.
And then, as Kubernetes started evolving, right, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and Kubernetes was probably like in the 1.9. I don't remember the exact version, but probably like 1.9 or whatever. I mean, it's like before RBAC and stuff, right? So as Kubernetes was evolving, I said, hey, this container orchestration, ecosystem. Well, gosh, then the cloud natives started coming up, and then they started doing distributed storage, and then certificate management, and so we started incorporating just kind of that entire ecosystem to say, how do we just get people to work with data securely, efficiently, and at scale? And really, the cloud native is where that's at. So
And that's where
very
Kubernetes
inspirational.
came in.
Yeah, Kubernetes and just really I mean, just the cloud native ecosystem is incredible. CNCF, all the projects that are going on there, all the open source innovation that's happening. It's really really inspiring. So.
That's cool. And Kevin, what have you been working on? Where do you fit into this process?
Um, I'm primarily Kubernetes, all things Kubernetes, um, all things Kubernetes, all
And
things
so,
cloud, AWS, Kubernetes, all of our integrations with tons and tons of CNCF projects. So uh,
cool. And you and Ken have been working tightly, I believe, right?
yes, we have.
That's cool. And you guys, I think you collaborate using Mattermost, right? We have a Mattermost instance, and that Mattermost instance is backed by Browser, another one of our technologies. I know we have Paul Otto is a fellow who's commented on a ZDTV before, and he was blown away the first time. He's another community member. He was blown away the first time he tried Mattermost over Browser because it seems like magic. It seems almost unbelievable that you can have a zero trust connection in your browser without actually having to have a client. And Andrew, what about you? What's your role?
So I'm primarily a software developer. Just because there's three of us, I kind of end up bouncing between a few different domains.
Right.
But mainly, I'm writing kind of our APIs and backend stuff, and also working on the Docker images to give to Kevin for our Kubernetes cluster.
Cool, cool. All right, so the project that you guys are working on, and you're using OpenZiti. How did you end up finding OpenZiti? What led you to think that OpenZiti was interesting and it opened up to the group?
Well,
Yeah, I think that's
well,
an
that was actually totally serendipitous moment. I think as Ken mentioned. I think I was in line to get something at ATO, and I bumped into Nick. Nick had made some sort of joke, and we got to talking about what we do, and he mentioned about OpenZiti, and I was like, that sounds really cool. That sounds like something that we could use for our platform because we were at the time looking for products similar to what OpenZiti can do. Then I brought it up to Chad, and Chad was like over the moon with it, and then the rest is history.
And so, when you say you were looking for products that could do what OpenZiti does, what specifically were you looking for? Were you looking for the zero trust aspect? Were you looking for reach? What actual was there one defining feature that you're like, oh yeah, we need something that does this?
I think Chad can speak better to that because he was very thrilled with it. I really like the whole zero trust aspect of it for sure.
Yes, zero trust was not a new concept to us at the time, but as far as tooling for properly implementing zero trust, ZD was quite mind blowing for us, I would say.
So I could probably answer that, Ken. And like very succinctly, right? There is a clear value proposition with OpenZiti. Okay, so our concept of Analytics HQ and what differentiates what we're doing is the concept of what we call a unified platform, right? So when we say unified platform, what we mean is that Kubernetes essentially offers its own micro internet, right? You've got DNS services and you've got CIDRs and you've got namespaces. I mean, you have this whole really ecosystem that kind of creates your own little mini internet, right? So what that means is unified platform kind of really gives us three things, right? So it's essentially what I call localized connectivity, right? So now if I have a database over here and I have machine learning project over here, I can communicate those services without having to go across the internet, right? And then you have centralized control over how data moves and who can access what, right? So it's a really good enclave. It's a really good enclosed environment. Where we lacked was data doesn't exist in a silo again, right? Like even though you can create these large, massive, scalable ecosystems of this unified platform, there's still a lot of data, in different places. And we needed a way to securely ingress and egress that information, right, point to point, essentially. And what was really cool about Ziti is, there's other, I would say, tools and such that are kind of similar, but they're more like, hey, we're gonna attach this Kubernetes cluster to this Kubernetes cluster, and then we're gonna kind of like bind namespaces and stuff, right? So it's very kind of like Kubernetes specific. But if I have like an old DB2, right, database out there, how can I now sync that data into my analytics ecosystem to now make use of that data from a legacy environment, right? And what's cool about Ziti is that it doesn't have that specificity of cloud native, right? Which means that we can now create connectors and tunnels between all kinds of different things, whether you're like IoT devices on embedded devices. I don't know if you guys work with like RTOS, real-time operating systems, IoT, 5G, right? So if you've got sensors out there, right, we can now essentially embed the SDK for Ziti, acquire that data, and then now tie that directly to us. So now you have kind of like a direct tunnel of your data going into our ecosystem for further processing and analysis using all of these advanced modern open source tooling at that scale. So it allowed us to not just have that concept of the unified platform and that ecosystem, but now all the connectivities external to that as well. It's really a 1-2 punch that's really powerful for data and
That's,
analytics. So we're really excited about
that's
that.
yeah, that sounds really neat. So, does your project that you're working on have like an agent that is sending those files, or is it focusing on IoT use cases, or is it doing all of the above?
I mean, it's really all of the above, right? Like we have projects and customers that have a database that they have created over 10 years that is under their desk in their office because, they have to hide it, so that it doesn't get shut down by their,
Right,
by the
with a
powers that
sticky
be.
note on it that
Yeah, right. Do not turn off, right?
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise the lights will shut off, right? Um, so there's a lot. We have that, but the data there is necessary for the organization to continue operating, as they need. So there's no good way, especially in high compliance environments that are highly segmented and segregated. So Ziti would be, for example, the only way that I really know of right now, because of the way that it's architected, that would allow me to go from a completely closed environment to a completely closed environment and securely transfer that data one to one without having to. Our alternative was extract that data as files, so terabytes of data out of this database, extract it as SQL files and chunks, somehow transfer those chunks manually over and then reassemble them and try to recreate that database in this other environment. It's untenable. It was just not possible. But Ziti, and the other thing is, with some of the other zero trust kind of frameworks that we were looking at the time, they still require that you have a port open, right? So like this environment is completely segmented. There are no ports. There is no port getting into that environment. So it's completely off the grid. You've got this that's completely off the grid. Ziti was the only way that we could actually make that secure, tunnel and connection, between the two environments. So there are use cases that, I mean, from our perspective, are really only possible because of Ziti's architecture.
So that's really neat. So, so you have some situations where you need to reach into a private segregated network from some other place, and because of the way ZD is architected, and because of the way it is relatively flexible, allowing you to deploy it, on a single machine or via Kubernetes or via VPC or whatever, that's giving you that kind of reach, which I think is really neat. So I want to hear a little bit about the recent stuff that Ken and Kevin have been up to. So I think you guys have been doing some really interesting things lately. Kevin, do you want to talk a little bit about where and what you guys have been doing with Kubernetes? Are you frozen? You look frozen. Oh,
No,
no,
not
wow. Just very still. Love it.
stoic. Ever the stoic.
Stuck in the still point of the moving world. So essentially, what we've been doing is figuring out a way to fully automate the process of setting up Ziti, an end-to-end setup for Ziti and Kubernetes within Kubernetes, fully automated, right? So with the click of a button, you get a Ziti setup that allows you to connect via Ziti to your Kubernetes cluster, right? Shut off your 6443 port, and you've got access to your cluster with.
And is 6443, is that the Kubernetes default API port?
Yes, that's the default port for the Kubernetes API.
Gotcha. Yeah, lots of Kubernetes APIs just exposed out there. I know that is a common mistake people make.
Hmm.
Similar to leaving your Postgres SQL database, out there exposed. I've seen those a lot
Well,
lately
also with
too.
managed Kubernetes, it's not always optional. As a consumer, as a user, I don't always have the choice
Yeah.
to opt out of exposing my Kube API server. But
So that's really neat. So you're saying you shut off that port, and then you're only able to access the Kubernetes API through Ziti.
Correct.
Really neat. And what about you guys were working, I think, a little bit with Spire recently too, right? Spire is a pretty neat project of its own. It's trying to solve the difficult problem of delivering certificates to workloads, right? I think is a pretty good summation of what Spire's all about. And so you were trying to use Spire and OpenZiti together. And I know Andrew Martinez came on last year sometime and showed us how that might work. And I think you
Hmm.
guys have been able to get that working too.
We are very close, but well, that's exactly what we got working. So Spire is, it's a way of delivering, an identity via um, X509 certificates. In our case, you can use X509 certificates or JWTs, and essentially you're guaranteed that SVID is that you're allowed to have that SVID because you have already established trust with the certificate chain that Spire is using.
And an
Um,
SVID being a spiffy verifiable identity document. So
exactly.
that is the thing that the Spire agent is providing to that workload. And so
Right.
you're able to take that SVID, that SVID, and present it to OpenZiti. And when that happens, that you're doing that so that you can authenticate that workload on the OpenZiti overlay, right? And you were trying to do this for, I think, if I remember properly, for I think an interesting purpose. I think you were trying to have multiple workloads mapped to a single OpenZiti identity. Is that what I recall?
Um, Not necessarily. We would have the option to do that, but yeah, I mean, Spire is flexible enough that you can do that. You associate it. Essentially, you would say, "Hey, this service account can get, or when this service account requests an SVID from the Spire agent, um, it is allowed to get this SVID basically." Right, and that's a predetermined thing that you set. It's kind of like a predetermined RBAC rule, right? So you don't have to you don't request a specific SVID. You say, hey, give me an SVID, and Spiffy or Spire will give you the SVID that is associated with your, or whatever parameters have been set ahead of time, and that can be
Right.
like, okay, something from this namespace with this service account requested an SVID. Okay, it gets
Yeah.
this SVID.
And those are Kubernetes, and you're doing it in Kubernetes. So like I know that there are other workload attesters too. Like the binary name, basically based on some attestable material, that
Right.
agent is able to deliver a SVID without the workload knowing anything about itself, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's pretty neat stuff. And so
Yeah.
you guys got that to work
We uh, mostly, yeah. There's,
mostly?
there's a little bit of um, we've got a little bit more automation work to do, but as far as actually getting the process to work itself, like, yeah, yeah.
Cool. So, if I can go to Andrew now, Andrew said he's a software engineer. So, are you looking to embed an SDK into any of the software, or have you already?
That's our goal. We have some plans for some internal APIs to use OpenZT, to use the SDK. Currently, we don't do that yet.
That's cool though. So, looking at it in plans in the future, but haven't gotten there yet, which makes sense. I mean, it takes a while. As I have a slide I like to show. It shows how long you can walk across the earth, and getting to application embedded zero trust is quite a journey. There was one thing that Kevin said earlier before our call here started that I thought was pretty interesting. He said that OpenZiti he thinks that it's interesting to both the business and the technical side. So,
Mhm.
Kevin, what did you mean by that? Because I thought that that was a nice quote. You were talking about how is OpenZiti interesting to the business and to the tech side?
Well, well, for the tech side, I'm the tech side, and Ziti is a really interesting piece of technology. Just in concept and in implementation, it's just been a very fun thing to actually implement in our project. Um, you
So
know, given,
it scratches that technical itch that you want to scratch.
yeah, exactly. It's not like a it's not just some bread and butter piece of technology that you have to put in your cluster, and you just you have to go through the pain points of doing that. It's not like you know
I mean, there's still some pain points though,
there's
right?
still some pain points, but it's interesting. It's interesting software. It's new. It's not anything that I've worked with before. It's not like anything that I've worked with before.
Yeah. And
So yeah, it's,
that first time you actually connect something from somewhere between, on a private network and it just works and you're like, man,
that
that is really cool.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. The first time when we got the full process set up of being able to connect to the Kubernetes API server over Ziti, and we shut off that port, and now only the person who had already enrolled their client, only that person of I think I was the first one to do it, but Chad and Andrew could no longer access the cluster, but I could because I had Ziti running,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that was absolutely that
It's
was
a
a cool.
it's a neat experience for sure. I
Yeah.
100% know exactly what you mean. And Chad, so from the business side, you probably best to answer this. What do you think interests people about OpenZiti to the business side of things? Like
Well,
why would the business find OpenZiti interesting?
I would say compliance, right? For me, right? Because we help businesses, but also we are a business. I can sleep better at night knowing that my Kubernetes administration for my environments is shut off to the world. There is no port knocking. There is no port scanning. There is literally no port for anybody to go knock on when it comes to our cluster now, right? That's an extremely powerful thing. So, me as a business owner of Kubernetes clusters, it helps me sleep better at night, right? For folks that are compliant, depend on those, it can make compliance easier, right? One of the I think the most unique aspects of Ziti is the SDKs. The fact that I can take an SDK, embed directly into my application. Now I can develop applications that now tie directly to Ziti. So now you have essentially portless microservices, right? Portless
Yeah.
IoT devices,
Yeah. Yeah.
with policy enforced connectivity of data movement, right? So to your point, when we first got ZD kind of going and Kevin shut that port off and I was able to update my local dev environment, like for example, as a developer, right? It's really useful as a developer because now I can communicate with other APIs and things that other folks are doing. So when Kevin adds a policy to my ZD client, I just see the policy pop up and then I got DNS resolution, right? So I can just
Right.
automatically connect to that thing. It is
Yeah.
it is technical sugar. It is addicting, right? Because now you're like, man, I just zetified that service. Now I want to zetify this service, and I'm going to zetify, So we're really excited because yeah, as Andrew said, we haven't done any SDK work yet, but we are going to be developing a lot of really cool demos and use cases to show. Again, it's really for us, our use case, we want to help people get value from their data. So whether you're developing telemetry data with like external IoT devices, whether you've got business transactional data out of relational databases, whether you got big files to transfer, we want to get that data into an ecosystem where now you can have people, with their digital workspaces working on that data. And then Ziti really now kind of serves as this way where we can now keep people segmented, keep data flowing, embed that Ziti SDK into external services to get that data, those direct data connections flowing. So from a business side, It's going to help you be compliant. It's going to help you sleep better at night. It's going to essentially, just time to capability, right? It's going to decrease the amount of time it takes for you to implement the things you need to implement. If you've got to work with data, essentially, and it's also open source, which means that you can fork it, you can review the source code, you can scan the source code yourself, you can make contributions as well. It's just there's so many benefits to just this whole
And a
project.
permissive license model too. Yeah.
Yep, yep. I think it's
Yeah.
Apache. Is it Apache too?
Yep.
License?
Yep. Or MIT depends, but mostly Apache too. Yeah. Kevin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, actually, just to add to why it's interesting to businesses, just a somewhat of an analogy, or why it's interesting at the business level. There are tons and tons of tools out there claiming to be zero trust, and tons of security tools in general. And I equate a lot of those things to putting locks, iron bars, and a security guard in front of a bank, whereas Ziti makes the bank disappear.
Nice.
So
Yeah. So we have a saying that we use where we'll say, "Build it in, don't bolt it on." So you're very much right on the same ballpark there. I have a slide where I show the Mad Max car, and it's got all this armor plating, and then I show the Beast, which is the limousine the United States president rolls around in, where all that security is built into the vehicle itself. So
yeah,
very similar idea. Like,
yeah.
but making it disappear totally. That's another great point too. Not having a port to attack is important. And then with the edge routers and with the fabric, if you wanted to stand a router up for a short amount of time and then turn it down and stand it up and turn it down, you have a lot of options and rolling routers and doing things along those lines. That's really neat. Chad, you were also talking to me earlier and said that you were talking to somebody who said, how is it possible to shut off a port? Is there anything around that you wanted to mention? Like, I know you were talking to somebody and they said, how can you possibly shut ports off? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, it's completely unintuitive, right? It's it's an unintuitive approach, but it's a very important and very innovative approach, I would say, right? I would say, where I think the industry is going right now is towards cryptographic ports. I think that's better than just raw ports, but I still think it's a mistake, right? I think we're stepping over dollars to pick up dimes, right? Whereas with Ziti, if there is no port to knock on, so for example, there's these things called CVEs and 0 days. What that means is that when that port is there, you're still consuming payloads that are being sent your way, even if they're unauthorized. They still have to be processed by that machine. That always leaves you open to things like buffer overflows and some of those bugs within those stacks. So
Yeah.
when you're receiving that TCP packet, it still has to go through the kernel space and then the user applications. I mean, it's being processed by probably dozens of different things up the chain. All of them could have some sort of 0 day that still leaves you vulnerable. So even if you're rocking like SPA, right, you're still processing data. You're also still open to DDoS, right? So you can still knock that port, potentially cause, DDoS, flood it. If there is no port, you're completely invisible, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's a huge security benefit. I mean, that is really going from like 0 to 100. Yes, I think SPA is like taking a step in the right direction, but now you're
Sure.
going all the way with ZD, essentially. So
Yeah, that's cool. So we kind of call that authorize before connect, ABC. So you actually make sure somebody is authenticate and authorized before connect. Yeah, that's definitely a really important point. That's really cool. And is there one part of ZD that is most valuable to you, or is there one part that you haven't been able to explore yet that you're itching to? Anybody?
Well, I mean, the policy stuff, I would say, is probably something. I would say our big thing next is to make ZD essentially a little more cloud native, right? Kind of more integrated with, the Kubernetes constructs of CRDs and sidecars, things of that nature. And part of what we're doing is essentially also kind of creating what we call an authoritative trust model, right? So it's why we're using Spire and Spiffy, is to kind of create an identity plane, across the ecosystem that is consistent, so that you can have essentially consistent trust, across the ecosystem. And I think this is, when people talk about zero trust, I think they have an intuition about what it is they're looking for, but they don't really know how to kind of pin it, right? And so it's a few different things, right? It's not just about ports. I think a lot of people, right now are focusing on microsegmentation, which is like, how do I control every individual port right across the ecosystem? Ziti is interesting in that it abstracts that. It now turns
Right.
your communication into a policy plane, right? Where we could, now integrate that with our authoritative trust model and, a few other things. And so, we're going to continue working with the Ziti team on, trying to get those features, integrated. But ultimately, from our perspective, we're interested in data and analytics and machine learning, and how to apply actual computation on data that you get value from, right? And we need data to be secure, and we need to be able to make data, mobile. And Ziti offers
Right.
us an incredible control plane to do that.
That's
It's
a
real.
really important point about having homogeneity of enforcement and the software level. Because if you're completely committed to microsegmentation, then you have some kind of firewall that is local to the nodes on your graph, right? And you have to have completely uniform hardware out there, or some kind of uniform enforcement layer that just is never going to be homogeneous. So you have the additional complexity with microsegmentation of that diversity of enforcement methods and mechanisms in the real world. No matter how well defined your policies might be, they can't be enforced uniformly unless you do it in software.
Very neat, very neat. Well, is there anything about the project or the product Analytics HQ is creating that I didn't get a chance to ask about? Like, I think it's really neat what you're doing, and starting with files, and then moving to just data in general, being able to get data into your platform. Is there something that I might have missed that we didn't cover?
No, I mean, I would say that, with what we're doing, of course, every, developer is going to say this about their product or project, right? There's a huge value proposition, when it comes to organizations that are trying to make sense of their data, right? And what a lot of organizations have to do today is what I call, rebuilding the airplane or rebuilding the car, right? So there's a lot of great open source or vendor provided data technologies that help you do ML and help you do, GPT or whatever, is kind of the flavor of the year for, when it comes to AI and ML. But the question is, okay, well, how do we do that? Well, this vendor is going to come in, you got to install their product. And I think the problem is that people today, the buyers, assume if I buy that one data analytics product, it's going to take care of my entire everything, right? When in reality, you need an ecosystem of things to be secure, to be scalable, right? None of this comes for free. I think people were kind of sold a big lie on cloud, right? I think people had assumed, right, the idea of cloud is nebulous, right? It expands, it contracts. And I think a lot of people thought that just comes for free, right? Like I can just deploy my application in the cloud, click a button, and then my application is now 1,000 times, so I can do 1,000 more users, right? Or whatever. And that's not the case at all, right? Like all of this stuff has to be designed and built in, essentially. And with HQ, we make it click button, right? Like we've essentially done all of that hard work, right? In terms of like how you scale APIs and how you do message queues and how you handle and process events and how you cache data and such, so that when you say, okay, you know what, I've got, a terabyte of, transactional data that I have to analyze. Okay, I need a 100 node Spark cluster. Boom, Spark cluster. It's not just, oh, let me go talk to my infrastructure guy to go stand up AWS, 10 more AWS nodes, with Terraform, and then now we got 3 to 6 months. Oh, I've got to get my cyber guy now to go and look at our configurations. The buyers don't understand the pain and journey that they're going to have to endure, right, without a product like Analytics HQ. So, we want to make scale. We want to make true cloud native accessible to data scientists who are not engineers, right? It is a waste of time for data scientists to have to figure out how to deploy containers. That is not something that a data scientist
Yeah.
should have to worry about. They should be focused on providing the business value with the data, right? And if folks are continually, like, organizations, like, in that grind of, like, okay, well, what single sign-on provider are we going to use? Well, should we use this one or this one? And they spend 6 months thinking about their SSO provider, which is just one tiny step of the whole process. That there's no value. For example, if you're a hospital, you should focus on patient outcome, right? How can I drive better health outcomes for my patients? If you're a bank, how do I provide better financials, right? And how do I use my data to provide better financial services for our clients? Those should be the focus, right? There's just a lot of stuff that has to happen, and that's what we want to reduce, that friction, for our customers. So, and Ziti is a huge part of that. It's one of our core components for how we do that at scale.
That's really cool. Well, I mean, I think I've gotten a pretty good idea of what you guys are up to. So that I thank you very much. One of the things that Chad you had mentioned before also was it might make sense to talk about the way in which encryption works from the application protocol to the application protocol. Do you want to cover that?
Yeah, no, I was trying to, I think, explain to some folks about kind of, overall how the encryption process, with ZD works. So there's some really interesting things here, right? That kind of go from the cloud native ecosystem that we're talking about. So you can see kind of like that first layer, you still have your application level encryption, right? So this would be, non-ZD aware, from what I understand. Let me know if I'm wrong here, Clint, but the application layer is your non-ZD aware encryption, right? So this is where we can say essentially, hey, we're going to use our certificates, internal certificates for, that layer. And then, so that's your point to point. This is what 99% of the web traffic is today, is just that application layer, right? And then that second one is so the AppSec layer, right? I'm sorry, the first round. So application would be your application traffic from this diagram. Your
Yep.
AppSec would be what 99% of internet communications is today, right? TLS, SSL, right? Certificates from GoDaddy or VeriSign or whatever, right? So you've got your application, and this is what the majority of people think is secure. So what ZD does is it's going to give you another layer of encryption, which is that end to end. And then so now you have your point to what I call ZD point to ZD point, right? Layer encryption. And then every edge router now has its encryption to every other edge router. So
Yep.
anyway, I was trying to explain that a little bit. I don't know if I do a good job of that, but that's kind of
Yep.
our understanding.
Yeah, I usually start at the outside. Like, I don't like this particular diagram, but it was the only one I could find. And I don't like it because the mutual TLS, really, it's between edge router to edge router. And there probably should be on the left-hand side a ZD SDK, because the SDK on to the edge router, that is mutual TLS, and then that'll be true. And I don't know why Restream in the mouse does this. So very sorry. I can't understand
So
what.
many mice.
I don't know why it does this. Let me, what? Let me try and let me try stopping
Chaos
this
mouse.
share. Right? Whoops, that's the wrong one. Let me try disabling that share, and I'll do just the window, and we'll see if that makes it any happier.
That glitch was designed to
Okay.
implement that.
Okay, that makes it a little happier. So there's mutual TLS. I usually start between every point to point. So like from the SDK or the tunneler on the left to the edge router, that's mutually TLS secured. Then from edge router to edge router, if you have more than one edge router, mutual TLS there as well. And then from the final edge router to the final piece of the SDK, or to the final piece of the overlay, all end-to-end encrypted. And then you have, all mutual TLS, my bad.
Right.
And
Each
then
respective hop is MTLS.
every hop is mutual TLS. Yeah, I tried to make a
And
little diagram that
the
showed that, but
E2EE is truly end to end from SDK to SDK. And that, in that sense, the data payload, the application that's enclosed in that E2EE edge to edge encryption is protected from ZD itself.
that's
That is
right. And
yeah.
that's the really important point to make, is that because OpenZiti by default has end-to-end encryption enabled, the end-to-end encryption itself protects you from the overlay itself. So if you turn off, which you can, and we've talked about not allowing it to be turned off, but if you turn off your end-to-end encryption, then technically the edge router would be able to inspect the actual payload, unless, of course, like Chad started out, you start with an application protocol which is already secure. So TLS or SSH or something along those lines. If you're using a protocol that is encrypted, then the end-to-end encryption is redundant, but it's always there for you by default, and that's why we have talked about perhaps just not even allowing people to disable it, because someday somebody might come along and switch that protocol from HTTPS to HTTP, and all of a sudden it's now actually inspectable at
Right.
the nodes when you don't want it to be.
It's very low cost computationally. It's a stream cipher that's optimized for embedded devices. It's the same. It's the same one that the Signal protocol uses from Whisper Systems.
Hmm.
Yeah, cool.
Well, can I know one more thing too, Clint, with that diagram
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I think is really interesting is what this encryption protocol that Ziti uses also allows us to do, right? Is we can host a trusted certificate on one end, and our application is completely unaware of all of this, right? Kind of in the middle, it allows us to still maintain a trusted connection, application to application, as if nothing was there, right? So
That's
what's
a
cool
real
about
killer feature too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so what's cool about this is those additional layers of encryption, what they do is they essentially mean that you can compromise really the edge routers or whatever, bring it down, it doesn't matter, right? You're not really actually going to gain any information by compromising the edge routers. So on the ends, you have no ports. And then in the middle, 0 day it all you want, right? It doesn't matter,
Yep.
right? Because of those additional layers. And then you have the trust between the edge routers because of the mutual TLS. So it's a really interesting it's a really interesting approach to the encryption for Ziti. It's very powerful approach.
Yeah.
Right. The fabric is zero access to the application data.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Cool. Well, before we wrap, I think this was a great ZDTV. Is there anything else that we want to get on the table? Anything else people are itching to say to the world?
I'll just we're helping people with analytics, but for people that are interested in secure Kubernetes and want to get Ziti rocking in Kubernetes or certificates, logging, monitoring, those types of things, we're here to help people do Kubernetes. We're also working on our own Kubernetes distribution that is highly focused on the security, compliance, and automation of all these things that we've kind of talked about today, called KubeZT. So we'll be releasing
very
that in
cool.
the coming months as well. Yep. And so again, Ziti serving as a core component of that ingress egress of that distro.
Well, you have to come back on and show us it in action. I'm really interested. I can't wait. I want to see I want to see it work, because it's always like we were talking about before. It's always fun that first time when you see something that's protected with OpenZiti work, and you know damn well nobody can actually get to that thing except for you, because you have that identity. So I'm looking forward to it. This has been really interesting. Very much appreciate you guys coming on and talking about what Analytics HQ is doing. Can't wait for KubeZT, and that's great. So
Yeah, and I want to
Thank you so
out.
much.
I want to shout out to Kevin for the great work that he's been doing on orchestrating Ziti in production on Kubernetes. He's definitely blazing a trail there, and like the whole community is going to benefit more from the work that he and a
already
few other
has.
community members have done to enable this kind of like a push button deployment. Helm install Ziti is really powerful for self-hosting your own stack of Ziti, your own personal stack of Ziti, and so great work on that.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure working with you on this as well.
Cool. All right. Well, fellas, it's been great. Thanks again for coming on ZDTV. I can't wait to see what you guys do next time.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
All
Look
right.
forward to it.
See you, everybody.